Hello, and welcome to the 16th of Decem-Baron 2020. And today I thought I'd briefly share a bunch of my other characters that I've created for Dungeons & Dragons and a few other games. It's going to be, I promise, this is going to be my plan is it's going to be a shorter sort of video, as I just kind of go over my various different characters that I've created for for mostly Dungeons and Dragons. I kind of for a while imagined all of my homebrew worlds and my characters sort of in the same multiverse, and I still kind of like thinking it that way, although it's all sort of a jumbled mess in my head. But then again, what in Dungeons and Dragons isn't? So anyway, I'm basically going to just briefly sort of talk about go over this list I have in my personal notes about the different characters I've made over the years, and I won't cover all of them. I'll probably forget a few, but this should give you an idea of the types of characters I like to make. I'll also I mentioned this earlier, but whenever I make a character, especially for Dungeons and Dragons, I like to do something a bit different. I like to experiment with things, whatever, and just if I'm playing in a different system, besides Dungeons and Dragons, I just like to play whatever seems fun and whatever works in the party that I'm going to be in. I like being a team player. I like sort of covering whatever bases are not being covered already, and I also just like doing cool, creative things as well. Looking for the different possibilities that the system can offer. So, first of all, your Hair Tintinabulor, my very first character. I've talked a little bit about him. I've the Silver Dragonborn Bard, and by Bard I mean librarian and linguist, researcher, traveling the this old wizened wise person who travels the multiverse, collecting stories from all over the place. I imagine he's sort of this person, almost a Stan Lee type character that just hops around and collects all these different stories elsewhere in my D&D multiverse. Then you have Fjord Niflheim, the Chillborn human warp spider character in the Norse campaign. You have Dench Morvaldi, who was the half-orc barbarian pirate in the Asian campaign. I mentioned Maximilian Granado, or nickname Decimation, so his full name would be Maximilian Decimation Granado in the Warhammer 40k game early on. The character I made for the Greek campaign, which was a sort of a dirge, anti-bard kind of thing with a little bit of storytelling mixed in, was Lysis the Dacry Mage. And I remember choosing Greek inspired words that he was sort of he was a nihilist. He was he was meant to be this powerful mage, but also a sobering one, essentially. I like playing cheerful, optimistic characters. This was sort of the opposite. Then you of course have Erendipity, or better known as Barondipity. I've talked about him at length yesterday. I mentioned that I was a player in Storm King's Thunder, the giant published campaign adventure. For that one, I actually made a Triton character. A Triton is a fish person, and I named him Moanus Matanuith. That name is ripped right out of the Disney film Moana, and I used the naming conventions of Tritons, where they put an us at the end of a male name and an eth at the end of last name. So Moanus Matanuith. Matanui being the island that Moana is from in the movie. Anyway, I will talk at a later date about the game Edge of the Empire, which is one of the Star Wars RPGs out there. I've created a Zabrak character named Turgo Rupro. Zabrak is the same race as Darth Maul. So Zabraks, they're not all evil as far as I know. They tend to be these people with reddish skin with horns from their head and things like that. I played one session of Call of Cthulhu, and for that I created a character named Felix Blagg, aka Professor Phoenix Layton. The Professor Phoenix Layton is a sort of a fake version of Phoenix Blagg. Felix Felix is like an actor, and he pretends to be this professor, right? And actually, I should say that Professor Phoenix Layton is well, I'll explain Reginald Layton in a little bit. I played a game of Numenera. I'll share a little bit of that in a later date. But I created a Jack named Decro. Now, in Numenera, there are essentially 3 classes. There are the nanos, which are sort of like the wizards because they manipulate the nanobots in the air and whatever and to do magical effects. You have the blades, which are essentially fighters, and you have the jacks, which are a bit of both. And because that's kind of like how bards are in D&D, jack of all trades, I chose that. And I created a character named Decro, I always loved fighting with shields, so Decro was like this this kind of shield fighter person and whatever. There was going to be a campaign where I was going to have this druid character named Versummer Autumnrime. I wanted to use a homebrew druid archetype, a druid of the seasons. And also there was a race called Naladrin. And essentially, Versummer Autumnrime, the name has all the 4 seasons in it. Ver from verdant, which means spring. Summer, meaning so Versummer, the summer part of that is summer. Autumn is autumn, and then rhyme for winter. Versummer Autumnrime. And Eladrin, meaning that there is a different like type of elf for each season. And I imagine that every long rest I would roll a 4-sided dice to determine which season he was, which would determine his racial and class features for that day, essentially. A fun idea. I'd love to implement the character in some other campaign, because the campaign I used him for initially was it kind of ended after one session. Not much more came of that because of scheduling issues and whatever. So I was a player, as I mentioned before, for the Tyranny of Dragons storyline. The Dungeon Master called that campaign Kill the Dwagon for fun. So I had 2 characters for that. My initial character was named Reginald Zazin Layton. Reginald was a researcher, an anthropologist who specialized in dragon and dragonborn culture, and so he gave himself a draconic name. His name is Reginald Layton, but he sometimes goes by the name of Zazin. He actually got killed in that campaign, my first player character death. So the replacement was a lizard folk named Erthosiak, which means like shadow blade or something like that, in draconic. But I'd never played a lizard folk before, and I don't think I'd played a warlock before, and so I was a hexblade warlock. A hexblade warlock is kind of like what would happen if a warlock had an enchanted like weapon, and that was like their main source of magic. So that was a fun character. Also, I had a Dragonborn monk character named Yarharet Balasar, who I decided would be the canonical father of Yarharet Tinchinabular. Yarharet Balasar actually was also for the Tyranny of Dragons storyline, but that was much earlier in my D&D career, and that campaign didn't go very far. And so until later, when that same DM was able to run that adventure for me and friends later on. But Yarharet Balasar has a background, and this was inspired a bit by the campaign itself, had a background of he used to be an ancient gold dragon under the service of the good god of dragons, Bahamut. However, this ancient gold dragon was so prideful that Bahamut cursed him to be sent down to the material plane as a humanoid to learn his lesson, basically. And that's who Yarharet Balasar is. And he became a monk. And he was a bronze dragonborn monk, so he could do lightning breath. So right now I'll talk about Reginald Layton. So at one point I used to play a digital card game called Eternal, which is a fun card game, but it started to get, the amount of cards and options and everything in that particular game. As much as I loved the world of that, I didn't want to get too invested in the world because I was already invested in other things. So I decided, even though I could have been, really invested in the lore of Eternal and everything, I decided not to. But there was one storyline in there that was really interesting to me, and it was the storyline about how this one. So there are these. I forgot what it's called, but there's like this archetype of character, like sort of this army of people who have this purple mark on their faces or whatever. and they're called the Strangers essentially, and they work together, and they're this army that fights or whatever. No one knows where they come from. Well, the story behind it was that there's this one person. Again, I forget the name of the person, but essentially, they their family or like their wife died from an illness because they weren't able to get the medicine they needed, and that they could have gotten that medicine if like people in the bureaucracy or whatever. This is a fantasy sort of steampunk setting, by the way, fantasy gunslinger sort of setting. If like sorry, hold on. My wife arrived home, but I'll wrap this up in a bit. Sorry, I'll be with you in a few moments.
No, you're good. I just was letting you know I'm home.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my wife's home. Cool. But yeah, I'm in the middle of a recording, so I'll have dinner soon anyway. But yeah, cool. So this guy, he couldn't get the medicine he needed because like institutions were just like, we don't have any medicine for you, or just like they basically turned him away and everything. And so he started, or maybe it was like some empire that like he was under. So he started to have a sort of like a disdain for this empire or this kingdom. And so he was led by some mysterious figure into some forest, and he found out all these different strangers that were like different versions of him, basically, in like parallel universes. And like they all had the same story. Like their beloved was sick, they tried to get medicine, but they were denied, and so now they have this bitterness. And so all these different versions of the same guy became the strangers, and they all kind of looked a bit different. They all have different skills and everything. They became their own army, essentially, and going against the kingdom. And so I thought, that's kind of cool, having the same, the whole idea of the parallel universes and everything. And I decided that every so often I would create a Reginald Layton in different universes. All right, Reginald Layton began in a browser game called Fallen London, which I don't play anymore, but it's a really cool subterranean steampunk browser game, which I think is still going on. Actually, it's been going on for a while. I used to play it on mobile, but it's not available on mobile anymore. It's just a browser, like PC, like website based game, text based choose your own adventure kind of game. Very bizarre and very weird and interesting and really cool setting. But anyway, the character I created in that game, I named him T.K. Reginald L. Orchid, or the full name being Thaddeus Christoph Reginald Layton Orchid. I created that convoluted name just so that the pen name Techrid would make some sort of sense. Techrid is the name of a constructed language I made. But so I thought it'd be a cool like pen name for someone. So TK for the tech part, and then the last part of Orchid for the rid. So, or TKR for the techer part, and then id from Orchid. So TK Reginald L. Orchid being Techrid, whatever. That's a version of Reginald Layton in Fallen London. A version of Reginald Layton that appears in at least one version of a Dungeons & Dragons adventure was Reginald Zazin Layton. One version of Reginald Layton that appears in Call of Cthulhu is Felix Blagg, a.k.a. Professor Phoenix Layton, and so on and so forth. So yeah, cool stuff. And let's see, other characters I've created. I've played a number of shorter campaigns, only lasting like 3 to 5 sessions. And it's usually for like a smaller, like less complicated game than Dungeons and Dragons. Very, very simple. Usually, you have your whole character sheet on a note card and all that kind of stuff. I once played a campaign of Pathfinder, and I'll share more about that later. But I got frustrated by all the ridiculous amount of character options in Pathfinder. But I am proud of the character I created in Pathfinder. Her name, it was the first time that I played a female character, by the way. All my other characters are male because I am male. I identify as such. But I thought it'd be, why not? Why not create a female character to play in a campaign? So, yeah. Her name was Presta Runa Kane, or Presta R. Kane. She has this short green hair, and she is a rogue. She's technically a rogue, but I decided that she would be a sort of like, she would pretend to be able to cast magic. She can do magic tricks and everything, and she wants to be able to cast magic, but she can't. She can do alchemy and things like that, but she can't actually cast magic as much as she wants to. This is sort of like I was inspired by a Danganronpa character of all things. There's a world's greatest magician character, Himiko, and I was inspired by that character to make Presta Arcane as someone who like keeps insisting that she casts magic, but she doesn't. And so a really fun story came from that. I also came up with a character. So a lot of people joke about multi-classing in all of the classes. Now, if you can multi-class, like for example, if you like bits of Barbarian and you like bits of Fighter, you can have both. You can multi-class both of them. Just however you trade diversity for depth. You trade depth for diversity, because you can't be unless the dungeon master allows it or the campaign allows for it. You can't be a level 20 fighter and a level 20 barbarian. You can be a level 10 fighter and a level 10 barbarian. So you don't become an amazing like a godlike fighter or a godlike barbarian, but you can be pretty good at both, right? So what happens if you multi-class in every single class out there, right? There's about 12 classes. So that means you have a lot of little features from everything. And you even have different kinds of spell casting as well. You cast some spells using charisma, other spells using intelligence. It would be a nightmare. It would be a logistical nightmare with character sheets, because you'd have to have different sheets for each different kind of class, magic casting class, theoretically. But I wondered how could you make that work narrative-wise? So I came up with some sort of like narrative for a character named Constantine Onolon. I'm not sure if I have the notes for that, but essentially spending 1 year as a barbarian, and that led, he spent 1 year as a wizard, but then a magical mishap happened, he was exiled, and so he became a druid, and then he also learned to survive, and that's how he also became a barbarian as well. And just all this sort of thing, so I have that character pretty much ready, just to test it out. Might not work very well because there's no depth to it. There's breadth. There's all these level 1 abilities. I would have a bunch of those, but anyway, just experimenting, story wise, mechanics wise to some degree, but mostly story wise, and just how the mechanics can interact with the story and how to explain the story through the mechanics, that kind of thing. So anyways, and I've made several other a number of other characters beyond that point, of course, but I have mostly been a dungeon master since then, and so I don't have much more to share today. So I will conclude with that. Just a very sort of quick, very fast overview of different characters I've created over the years of my playing Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. And tomorrow I will talk about those other role-playing games that I play besides Dungeons & Dragons, because it's quite a lot. I'd like to think I have quite the broad tabletop RPG resume, so to speak. So yeah, thank you for watching and or listening. See you tomorrow. Take care. All the best.